Drying my hands on the small magenta towel, I looked over the receptionist's shoulder. I scanned down to my next appointment. Ah, excellent, I thought. Jane, I'll call her Jane, was my next client. I looked up and beckoned to Jane. She walked over to my station. As she settled into the big 1950s style barber chairs, Jane gushed, I can't wait to tell you what we're doing in my class now. As she launched into her story, I gently interrupted her to suggest that we first discuss what sort of haircut she wanted that day. Then we could talk. After her shampoo, she returned to my chair and proceeded to tell me everything about her theater class and everything else going on in her life. I loved when Jane came in for a haircut. We got along so well. She told me all about her grapplings with what to teach, wonderings about her profession, and issues with her family. Over the years that she had been my client, we often expressed how much we liked talking together. She felt safe talking to me. One time after an appointment, we wondered if we might like to be friends, rather than hairstylist and client. We decided to meet for breakfast. On the day we met for breakfast, we greeted each other in much the same way we did in the salon. We ordered breakfast, and then we tried to have a conversation. But now everything was different. The trust that she had in her low-stakes confidant hairstylist was jeopardized. And my interesting client who introduced me to a world I had no access to in my personal life was suddenly someone I was attempting to befriend. We both felt the strained attempts at finding common ground upon which to begin a friendship. And by the end of the breakfast, we each independently chose not to try that again. The next time I saw Jane for a haircut, the professional relationship that we had had before was disrupted. In our attempt at a friendship, the trust that we had built was broken. Her hairdresser was no longer a neutral witness to her life. I was something different. And I was no longer sure who she was. When I turned the situation around to try to understand what was going on, though I was not a therapist by a long shot, the experience seemed as weird to me as meeting my therapist for lunch. Though I liked my therapist very much, I wouldn't want to know her as a friend. My therapist held my greatest fears, honored my deepest sorrows, and witnessed my life. If I became friends with my therapist, our roles would change, and I would feel vulnerable, exposed, and unsafe. And she would have a certain power over me. The special trust would be broken. Now, let me be clear, a hairstylist is in no way the same as a therapist. And when I was a stylist, we didn't have anything like a code of professional ethics and conduct or anything about like that. And I doubt there is one of those now. But there was, between me and my clients, a carefully nurtured sense of trust and confidentiality. I understood my role and had an unofficial code of conduct that I worked to follow and maintain the best I could, especially after I tried to be friends with one of my clients. Perhaps some of you as retired or current professors, educators, therapists, or medical workers have professional codes of conduct. Perhaps you recognize the trust that your clients, students, or patients have under your care and within your offices or classrooms. Perhaps those of you who are or have been students, clients, and patients rely upon the ethical behavior of your teachers, therapists, and doctors. It is professional codes of conduct that help hold those in helping professions accountable to their roles. These differentiated roles and boundaried relationships are not the same as friendships or intimate sexual relationships. There is a separation that allows a sense of security, safety, and trust. Sometimes these professional relationships can be quite close, connected, and friendly, but always within the framework of each person's role. These are not friendships, though there may be closeness and a great friendliness between people. These sorts of defined roles are present within religious communities, between religious leaders and members of the congregation as well. It is with clear boundaries between the role of the minister and friends and members of the congregation, clear boundaries between me and you, that we can create deep connection and build the trust that can allow deep sharing by you. Your minister has the honor. It is an honor. Your minister has the honor of witnessing your life through what you share pastorally. I have mentioned in the past the harm that may happen in congregations when a minister or other religious leader steps out of their professional role and engages in friendship or intimate relationships with a member of the congregation. But I haven't clarified how ministers and congregations came to recognize the impact of this. Personal relationships between ministers and members were not always seen as harmful to congregations. However, over the decades, ministers and religious leaders of all religions who came to serve congregations after a previous minister had had personal, intimate relationships with members began to notice similar relational patterns and habits. These relational habits sometimes led to a congregation that didn't quite thrive. These relational characteristics impacted the new minister's ability to pastor and care for the congregation from within their role. A minister who comes after a previous minister who had broken the sacred trust of the congregation by looking to members to serve their personal relational needs is informally referred to an after pastor, a pastor who comes after a previous minister. A few examples of these relational habits and characteristics include some things like an inability to lock and secure the doors of the building, or have an overabundance of miscellaneous stuff collected all over the place. But more serious characteristics sometimes include suspicion of the board of trustees, or individuals making decisions that impact, interfere, or undermine previously made decisions or policies, or an inability or unwillingness to speak directly to each other to address concerns, or both look to the minister to make independent decisions and give strong direction while also undermining the minister's authority, or imagining and disseminating boldly untrue information about the minister or minister's family or other staff members. These are some of the typical ways that communities of humans react to trauma and a breach of trust by a leader. Nothing is wrong with a congregation that experiences this. Nothing is wrong with a congregation that experiences this. And congregations can heal, and they do. These are all examples of characteristics witnessed by ministers who served congregations after previous ministers disregarded their professional role. However, it wasn't till ministers shared their experiences and noticed commonalities that they recognized that past behaviors were impacting their ability to minister. It was then that ministers began to see the importance of developing and enforcing codes of professional conduct and guidelines. The Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association finally included in their code of conduct in just 2011, only 11 years ago, an explicit statement that ministers will not engage in certain personal relationships with anyone they serve as a minister. Today, the code expands upon and clarifies this earlier statement. Before the creation and updates to the code and guidelines of conduct, personal relationships between ministers and members were not fully recognized as inappropriate or possibly harmful. However, today they would be. Today, sexual relationships enacted upon a congregant by a minister is seen as conduct unbecoming of a minister, or misconduct, or an abuse of power, and are now violations of the minister's code of conduct. It is also recognized that friendships and other types of personal relationships between ministers and congregants may very likely be harmful to congregations. Ministers are encouraged and supported and covenant to be mindful of their role as the minister in all interactions with members of the communities they serve. As your interim minister, I wanted to speak with you about this complicated, maybe hard to think about topic, because it is helpful to know how ministers in more recent years have come to live into their calling. There is a lot more focus on how to uphold the special and unique relationship that a congregation has with a minister. For some of you, this attention by ministers for their professional boundaries may feel different than what you have experienced in the past. What I hope you hear from this today is a deep, loving concern for the well-being of the congregation by ministers as a whole. Not just in Unitarian Universalism, but many religious communities. We are trying to do better. You, this congregation, is entering an exciting time. You have entered the search process to match and call a new minister to serve you here in Oneonta. Your congregational record has been released to ministers who are looking for a new congregation to serve. And this is exciting. I hope you are getting excited about a new minister. I am, on your behalf. This congregation, you have so much to look forward to. You have a new beautiful mission and vision, which are on the back of the order of service, that you will live into. You have space next door to move into and grow into, and you will have a new minister who will get to know you and love you, and whom you will get to know as well. 2 years ago, when I first arrived here, I shared with you a poem by my colleague, Kathleen Rolls. The poem is written from the point of view of a member of a congregation. They ask the minister in the poem, "Do you know my name? Do you know my story?" The congregant remembers all the ways that previous ministers had honored their lives, held them in challenging times, and celebrated with them in joyful times. All the ways in which the minister showed up and was present when called. The congregant is worried about who the next minister will be, how they will honor their role, and how they will be present. And then the poem turns as the minister shows up, the new minister shows up to offer support and love. In the poem, the congregant says, "I called the office, and she came. He dropped by just to see how I was doing. She sat and listened to me and asked if I would be okay with a hug." And then the years passed, and now the years have passed, and the congregation is alive and thriving and flourishing. The poem points to a deepening and trusting relationship between the minister and the congregant, a trusting relationship that is secure and safe and built on the knowledge that the minister upholds their sacred role with the religious community. And my prayer for you is that you and your future minister find in each other a deep and abiding trust and love. May it be so.